I'd just like to start by telling you just a little bit about my teacher. He was my high school art teacher between 1970 and 75 when I was in high school, and he taught at this school for only 6 years, 1969 to 75, by invitation. He actually was not qualified to teach, but the principal wanted him to come and just share his enthusiasm for art. He had made his living as a craftsperson and had taught all his life, and there was no arts at all at this high school, and they could not bring on another full-time teacher. So Arthur went over part-time, voluntarily, and within a few weeks was full-time, voluntarily, and stayed for 6 years. It became a credit course, and that's what I was able to take part in. He included all kinds of different craft mediums as well as painting and drawing and design in the curriculum. I'll talk more about that soon. So I thought I would just begin by showing you the way I remember Arthur Brecken. This is in the classroom in 1973, the one day that I brought my camera to the class. Always a twinkle in the eye, short man, I'd say maybe 5'2" perhaps. Always a smile, always light on his feet. He always wore hush puppies. And just like an elf almost, right? Like an elf or a leprechaun. I just said right because his niece is sitting here. Sense of humor, just a real good person, a real gentleman as well, and very modest man. I might have missed a picture in there, I don't know if I did or not. But in the background on this photograph, you can see students work. This is at our year-end display, sort of an open house, and it's fashion design. This was not part of the regular curriculum. He embraced that. He embraced other mediums such as batik. One of the girls was keen on that, so he said, yes, bring your vats in, bring your dyes, and we'll do batik in the classroom. So there was usually at least a couple of different mediums happening at one time. I won't jump ahead of myself, but I'll just see what I have to say. I was thinking I was going to see the next picture coming up, but I'll just remember what I want to say. Yeah, the curriculum that he included here in the classroom, in addition to art, drawing, and painting, was soapstone sculpting, jewelry making, high-fired copper enameling, architectural drawing and model making, which I loved. I was doing that by myself anyways before I went to school. And it comes from his own background. He studied applied arts at Mount Allison University in the late 1930s, where there were all the different craft mediums. So I think he just passed along what his own experience had been. It was a very rich program for such a small school. His support continued long after we were out of the classroom, taking his work and his students' work to craft fairs. One of the girls' enamelings of birds, that's my jewelry, that's Arthur's jewelry. Taking students to art fairs. That's a small photograph, but it's one of the students that actually became a professional artist, doing a lot of Native American work, actually. And a show that he and I did after I had gone to do my master's. I did a master's in metalsmithing at Cranbrook Academy of Art, north of Detroit. And just for a few weeks I was home in the summer, so we did a two-person show together and a sale. Many of the pieces you'll see in the Mentor Metalsmith exhibit at the Craft Council Gallery are here. The cattail sculpture, the salt and pepper shakers, the inkwell, the perfume bottles, some of the spoons, even my religious spoon is there somewhere. Yeah, there's the top of it there. There's an early piece by me. The letter opener is there, the pickle fork. So those are some pieces that Arthur kept all through his life. There's actually the piece that you had it, and that's the tall salt and pepper shaker, which I have in a photograph in the catalog. Arthur invited his students from the high school to come to his house. He only lived a few doors down from the high school, and this was his house. Wedgwood Blue, he called it, at the corner of Main Street and a busy street just between the public school and the high school. We'd go in through the woodshed door, the woodshed this side, summer kitchen straight ahead, and his regular kitchen to the left. And his kitchen was his studio. He had a round table, counterweighted, and that's where we did all our work, at the kitchen table. I spent so much time there that he just said to me, don't knock on the door, just come in. And he said, and one time I arrived and I said, Arthur, well, here I am again at Kitchen College. And he just laughed And ever after that, he adopted the name Kitchen College. This is my final year, grade 13 in those days, and my display includes the high powder enameling, which was just finished at Kitchen College the night before. That's glass powder on copper, a couple of birds, high powder enamel, painting, sketching, floor plans, bit of soapstone sculpting, some silver work, and this little violin in the corner. That's in the exhibit, but I made the body of the violin in 1974 or 73. And I was having some technical problems, and I set it on the back burner, and I finished it last year. So 44 years later, so that piece spans my career. It's a violin and bow sculpture in the show. It's one of 3 pieces, actually, that are purely non-functional sculptural pieces, which was a new direction for me as well. So that's the body of the violin, and this is the finished piece in the exhibition. Where there's normally ebony on a violin, I've used yellow gold. The bow itself is white gold for strength, with a bit of plastic on the edge of a white ruler, actually, for the hair. And actually silver thread that actually tighten up. It did make a bit of a twang, but I didn't want to tighten too tight, so it doesn't actually play in tune. But it is as realistic as possible, with a feeling of lyricism. My style evolved out of Arthur Brecken's. Arthur's tended to be fairly baroque, fairly ornate, and my style gradually evolved out to more pure forms and clean flowing lines and smooth surfaces. So that's very much in my style there, in that framework. Music was important to my teacher. His sister, Grace, your mother, played piano and sang, and she graduated from Mount Allison University in music in 1946. And I remember one time Arthur sitting down and improvising on the piano. I could not believe my ears. He could just rattle off all kinds of arpeggios. But he loved to hear music. He loved going to concerts. And he respected very much the fact that I was serious about studying music, because I studied violin seriously at university before I switched to art. And he totally embraced that. So it means a lot to me to include a theme in the exhibition about music. This is one of Arthur's wood carvings that he did in school. In 1938 or 39, he would have carved this in Honduras mahogany. It's almost scale size. It's about that tall. It's on the wall in the gallery. He always told me it was never finished, and I can see maybe there's a couple of places he might have made a mistake or two, but it doesn't matter. There's still some pencil lines on the actual piece. And his niece loaned it to me. I cleaned it up, and I don't think it's ever been shown before, so here we are, 80 years later. I could not find an example of his silver work with music. I know he made several, but I could not find one. So this is the one honorary non-silver piece in the show. He did trays, many trays, especially during the Depression. He said they sold quite well, quite large copper trays that he would beat into wooden forms and etched them and covered them with wax and etched away patterns with nitric acid. In this case, it's an abstract pattern of quarter notes. I remember also a tray that he did this size. That's almost life size. My goodness, they're about 2.5 feet big. But he did one with the entire music for Jesus' Joy of Man's Desiring by Johann Sebastian Bach around the perimeter. And even though I couldn't find that particular tray, I wanted to use that as an inspiration for a piece. So what I did was I created a tuning fork holder. And the tuning fork fits in there. The whole piece is so heavy, I called it A Tuner Paperweight. It's in the shape of his initial A, and it also is tuned to the note A. So there's about 3 levels of meaning in terms of the word A in there. And if you're Canadian, it's pretty good, eh? But there's the theme of the chorale tune, Jesu, joy of man's desiring. If little diamonds set into the whole notes and half notes. I should be using my pointer. I forgot I had it. And here's the accompaniment. Those 2 strands of music are heard simultaneously, and so we have it here in visual counterpoint as well. I've had a lot of fun creating pieces for this show that would mean something in terms of it being Arthur. That's the A. He signed his name just like that. But if one didn't know that, it doesn't matter. It still stands up, right? I would like just to talk a bit about Arthur's experience at Mount Allison University. The copper tray I showed you and the wood carving were done during his student years. He graduated in 1940 from Mount Allison. That's him as a young man. and then served in the war for 5 years, and then came back to Mount Ellison and used the studio situation and taught part-time there, particularly when his own jewelry teacher, Ellis Rolston, was on sabbatical in 1950 and 51. Ellis Rolston gave Arthur the reins to teach the program for the jewelry. Mr. Rolston also taught the weaving at Mount Ellison. This was in the applied arts. So this is Arthur during that year, 1950. And actually, I met a classmate. I met a classmate of that girl in the picture. We didn't know who she was, but a classmate I met in St. John's at the show there. She's now 87 years old, and that girl's name is Joan Whitman. She was the same year as this lady I met in St. John's. It's almost beyond living memory now. So that's Arthur Brecken in 1950. And one of my favorite pieces of his, I remember studying this a lot, this is in the Mentor Metalsmith exhibit, is this Bloodstone Ring. And you can't really see it very well, but in the stone itself, the bloodstone is a dark green. There are actually little red flecks, which he said are like the pennies in a pool. He wanted this to look like the reflecting pools at Mount Ellison University. It was inspired by that. Although I still see sort of a Chinese influence with the lotus blossom and so on. But I loved it as a student myself, just the way the petal and the leaf are a logical way of securing the stone, and the way he has built up layers around, almost like a landscape around the stone, using sheet, several layers of sheet metal, and even on the shank, 2 layers of sheet and twisted wire carved, little spherical beads, all kinds of motifs that Arthur used throughout his career. Very Baroque-like, very ornate. But all built, all constructed. I'll talk about that soon. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the only piece he's ever signed. A.L. Brecken, A.L. Brecken, Mount A, 46, and this says Sterling up here. But it's the only one he ever signed, so this one we know the date, 1946. So yes, the techniques involved in the Bloodstone Ring really resonated with me. In addition to the twisted wire, which is like rope-like strands, 2 strands of wire twisted up like a rope. In addition to that, he did a lot of work with coiled wire. So this pickle fork's in the exhibit as well, and there's a coil of fine sterling wire right around to the tip and down the whole length of the handle of this pickle fork. And he would take patterns like that and build form out of them. The sides of this box are 3 strands of coiled wire, almost built up like a log house wall. And let's see if I have 2 shots of this. Yeah, just to show you the way it looks inside as well. The pattern that's on the inside is exactly the pattern that's on the outside. There's a 3-dimensional integrity to pattern that has been built this way and has been twisted out of strands of wire. It's not chased in, it's not engraved in or etched in. It doesn't wear off. I remember I made a ring for my father with this kind of twisted wire on top, and it wore smooth, but you could still see in cross-section the evidence of the pattern that was there. It never really wore away. So that just resonated so much with me, this precise soldered construction, which is one of the themes in the exhibition, actually. Not cast. I mean, a casting would wear off smooth. It's just, this has the feeling of 3-dimensional integrity that I've always been attracted to, as well as just the aspect of building up something precisely. Just, I can't work with cloth. I can't work with clay because it's too flimsy. I love the precision and the rigidity of metal. So this principle then is just taking like circles, round wire circles, rope-like patterns in circles, and building them up one at a time. Each one would be soldered, then there'd be 2. The next one soldered, there'd be 3. Next one soldered, there'd be 4. Cumulative processes of building up form and pattern, carefully keeping everything stacked. Those salt and peppers by Arthur Brecken inspired me very early in my career to make almost the same thing. So I was imitating or copying my teacher at first, but the tops I made about 15 years later, 18 years later, and that's starting to show more of the clean surfaces. Some of the same patterning, but much cleaner surfaces. And even the way that the wires dovetail with one another is more like a zipper, so that there's a weave to those wires. They're not just filed flat and butted against each other. They're There's a little more flowing through of line in the pattern itself, as there is in this pendant, or down the center. The twisted wires mesh perfectly like a zipper. And then I just expand it out, strand by strand. And again, the feeling of flowing line is starting to show up. Started in 1973, but finished in 1995. Started in 75 and finished in 95. So little traces of my own style are starting to come through in these early pieces. The culmination of precise solder construction really is in this water pitcher. It's a fairly large piece, about 10 inches high. It's a vessel where I've always wanted to create a vessel where the shape of the piece would serve as its own handle. You can actually reach into the side of this piece and it comfortably fits your fingers and your thumb around the back, so there's no need for an extra handle. But the only way I could think to do it was to construct it in that shape. It would be almost impossible to work with hammers and anvils and stretch the metal in that far. So there I went at it, wire by wire. I'd like to show you that process because it's a good example of precise solder construction. These are the first two wires. So it's the same piece as you just saw. Whoops, fiddlesticks. It's the same piece as that. And in the back, I'm going too fast, too furious. In the background, you'll see this styrofoam model. And I'll pass that around. My first thought was to actually form the wires to that model and just solder them in place. But warpage became such a problem, I wound up with a chubbier piece than that model. So I just used it as a visual guide. Half a second out. Open up this bag too. Because there's some templates that I had to use just to kind of keep on track. I'll pass them around as I go along here. So you can see in the top area, this is going to be where I'll build the wires around for the shape of the handle. That's the very same piece of wire. It went through all 231 solderings. Yeah?
All of these wires are the same dimensions, are they?
The ones in the piece are, yes. That's the little thinner square wire there. That's not,
Right,
that's just a square wire there.
At the base, one is very broad, and then they have to converge.
That's correct. Yeah, because some of them, I'll talk about that too, but some of them are tapered to points, right? Just like almost like slivers.
Okay, so they're, what's the word, not parallel, transversals or whatever, because they can't be like this, they have to taper, as you say, taper.
Yeah, side by side. So it allowed me to create this asymmetrical gourd-like shape or lady slipper orchid-like shape.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would just have a parallel, vertical-sided
Right,
piece.
yeah.
But there's quite a few slender, short, tapered pieces toward the tip of the spout there. There's a lot of very complex, looks like a fingerprint pattern within the handle, because that was quite a complex thing to try and fill solid with wire. So some of them come to a point coming down and going up.
So did you, today they would have a computer.
I know.
To sliver it off, but you didn't have that.
Nope.
So you had to do it by gosh and by golly.
Yep. Yep. Now talk a bit about that. Just yes, exactly. I mean, this could be digitally printed.
Yeah, yeah.
Heavens forbid. I mean, I'm a dinosaur. I really am.
Because that's how Frank Gehry does his amazing thing. He said he couldn't do it without a computer.
Yeah, he could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost gave up because the warpage was a problem at first, and sometimes even burning up the wires was a problem. Because my first thought was to do it like a cage and fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
But no, I couldn't possibly continue to solder around there without heating too hot on some of these wires.
Yeah.
So I started to fill in solid, and more solid in the handle area, so you can start to see the very first solid area. And I'll kind of whiz along. This is not real time, okay? This is like about 2 wires a day. But there's the solid area of the handle. Now, recessed right in. And I could solder from the other side. I could put the heat to the other side of it before I enclosed the whole vessel. Little by little, I got more and more structure, right? Here, to answer your question, I'm holding one of these slivers. This has been carved to a point. It's like a long, slender canoe shape. And it also has been carved to receive the round surface of the next wire. So this has actually a groove carved into it. It's almost like tongue and groove fitting.
Yeah, yeah.
So that when that locked in this space, it really snapped in place and it held itself when I soldered, so it wouldn't fall apart when I was soldering. I found kind of a rhythm after a while. I would go across 4 strands and fill in the center one, and then 2 spaces between, each a wire wide. That's a good photograph showing how the pieces were formed ahead of time to fit exactly the space that's there.
The background is great.
Yes, that's my backyard.
Yeah.
My studio looks out over the ocean there. Just to explain what soldering really means, it means that there's a lower temperature alloy of metal that's flowed in place. So the sterling silver will melt at a higher temperature than this alloy. They're close, maybe only 100 degrees different, 1300 to 1200, this sort of thing. But the idea is that the solder will not work like putty. It won't fill a gap, it won't plug a hole. It has to have surfaces contacting one another, like as if you're gluing something together. Then the solder will flow down like quicksilver when it reaches the right temperature. I'll talk a bit about that too. But this is quite a cumulative process, isn't it? And working around the back of it, working around to the far side again. Go equidistant around. And there again, I've left room for 3 wires in there. There'll be a central one and then 2 slivers on either side. Yeah, in that picture, you can see some of these templates. The one at the top, actually this is one that you can't even see in the picture, but that's the one that was up near the very top. And yeah, that's the opening up around the spout. And this one had to be taken apart. But when you put it together, that's the shape of the inside of the piece. So feel free to pass that around as well. So the one this lady is holding is right here. Okay. And this other one, again, I had to make it so I could fit it inside, is this one here. So I was just really trying to be conscious of staying as symmetrical as possible aside from the handle area. I still have a cardboard one, but I'll pass it around too. I forgot I had that, because I just had as many as possible just to get the symmetry right as I went along. By now, it's really holding its shape. It doesn't warp at all as I'm soldering. I'm not burning anything up. And you can still see there's the same templates you're holding there. There could be another one in there I haven't got. That's that metal one up top still. It never got stuck. It never soldered to the piece because there's such a ribbing to this wire that it never actually made contact where the solder flowed. I was afraid I was going to solder it in place, right? And as I went along, I trimmed back. These wires are varying length, but I would trim back eventually toward a spout. Precise solder construction. This actually shows a little more of the technique. You're asking about I think we're talking about soldering anyway, and I have to actually keep the metal clean with a liquid borax, which dries on the surface and becomes glass-like. It'll turn to glass at the soldering temperature. So there's a real indicator, visual indicator that the metal is reaching a soldering temperature. And if I have all this vessel out here, the same temperature as this wire, equal temperature, and this turns to glass, then the wire I'm soldering in place is just going to take the solder and it'll flow down like mercury in between. There's the finished piece. So that's kind of the Rolls Royce.
Mm-hmm. How did you solder from the inside when you were almost completely?
And I actually didn't need to. I did solder from the inside. I don't think I have another photograph, but when I only soldered from the inside when it was open on the across from the handle. So when this metal was not in place yet, I was building around the other side with the handle part. I guess I could hit the heat on the inside of the handle then, and I had to. I couldn't possibly heat inside the narrow opening.
Oh,
Yeah, because it'd be like an oven. It wouldn't work. So I was able to get that established before I build around the rest of the way. But the end result, it's somehow more than the sum of the parts in terms of the surface, the way the light dances on it, the way it looks like a fluted column, like something classic, like Greek or Roman, but also organic, like blades of grass tapering up and down.
So is it an illusion or are there several colors?
It's an illusion there. That's reflections. Yeah. It's all sterling silver with a bit of oxidization in the. It's like a ribbed kind of texture, so it feels really nice in the hand too. It really grips. It's a heavy piece, but when you're picking it up, it grips in the hand. So that's a really kind of way out example of precise solder construction, which was what Arthur Brecken did.
Why did you mention Arthur again, since he didn't do this?
No, he didn't make that piece, but that's the technique he used throughout his career. He never did any casting. He never did any kind of other technique, no mold making. He always built his pieces from strands of wire or twisted wire or rope, like wire.
The ultimate homage.
Yes, exactly. It's the same technique.
What did you call the technique?
Say again?
What did you call the technique?
It's just precise soldered construction, sometimes called fabrication, and also the whole idea of cumulative processes, building things up gradually, strand by strand. That resonated with Arthur and it resonated with me too. So that's the theme. One of the themes is precise soldered construction and cumulative processes.
Did you have to create the strands to begin with, or did you have to buy like?
I could buy it, yes, even thickness round wire, yes. Yeah. It is possible to draw wire through a drawing plate and get the sizes one wants, but it is very difficult actually to do by hand. It'd be nice to have a power machine to do that, but no, I bought 1/8 thickness round wire, and then I did all the carving of the slivers, yeah.
So I shouldn't ask
Mhm.
this, but have you entered this in many competitions?
Well, no.
Really?
No, I just, it's available for sale, but it's been published, but I haven't put it in competitions. I don't know why. No. It'd be a competition caliber type piece, all right.
Well, I mean, it's very beautiful. And,
I love that shape. I really do.
Yeah.
It reminds me a bit of some of George Jensen's work from the 50s.
yes.
Yeah. There was one water picture Jensen's made called The Pregnant Duck. It had that same kind of asymmetry to it,
Yeah.
but it had a handle that swung up over it. So it's reminiscent of that as well. For me, I think Arthur Brecken was inspired by this ring. This is in the exhibit as well. This was brought back from China. It's over 100 years old. The trademarks are Chinese. It's got the same motifs. The spherical beads, a rope-like twisted strand, just one there, and a coiled wire. More beads here, all constructed, soldered together. I can only imagine that he studied that when he was younger. I didn't know he had it till he passed away. It came to me in his will. But it's exactly the kind of things he did in his work, with that pickle fork, etc., and the salt and peppers and so on. So to me, the story starts there. Starts with that ring, inspired him. 50 years later, I studied his work, and it inspired me, and I took it from there, right? I'd like this to kind of pivot into the Chinese influence in my teacher's life. It was so important. He was the son of missionaries. Where am I? Just make sure I'm on the right track, Jack.
So are you saying this was a Chinese craftsperson?
No, he was just the son of missionaries. Well, that would be made by a Chinese craftsperson. I'm sorry.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
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 And one wouldn't normally think of it that way.
I suppose.
You know?
Yeah, it's stamped with a symbol that means pure silver, and it's stamped with another symbol that means Chen Lian Lu, I think it is, which is the building. I don't think it's actually the name of the maker. It means a multi-story building. So it might have been the store it was sold at. It might have been where the shop was, where it was made. But it would be made by a Chinese person over 100 years ago. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it might be Chinese coral. I've always thought of it as jasper, but somebody that came along one time in my St. John's show said, no, I think that's Chinese coral. So I'm learning as I go. I didn't know what stone it was, really. Might be Chinese coral. Arthur Brecken's parents brought back a lot of wonderful keepsakes, including some priceless Chinese gowns, silk thread, gold thread, aristocratic gowns. It was the eggshell china. Yes.
Actually, now I'm kind of reaching on this, Wesley.
Yeah.
I think because they would have taken those big ships to get across, this is like early 1900s, those possibly might be Japanese.
Okay. Yeah, they may pick them up on the way.
Possibly the boat would have stopped first in
Yeah.
Tokyo or
Yeah, exactly.
one of the Chinese or Japanese ports, and that would have gone on to Shanghai.
Because I remember him showing me these eggshell porcelain, I think it was, that you could see through, practically see through. Oh my gosh, they were so thin. So they brought back many keepsakes from their trips to the Orient, for sure. And this was one of them. So this is Arthur, well, I could tell you the story, because Arthur's parents were in China from 1907 to 1915, but they went back to Canada in 1915 because their name came up for adoption, and the person they adopted was Arthur Brecken. So this is Arthur when they returned in 1916 in his mother's arms in Chengdu rather. Vida May was his mother, and his father was Egerton. This is the school he attended, where he learned Chinese alongside of English, 50-50. He spent many an hour practicing Chinese characters with a brush, which I think comes through in his own distinctive handwriting all through his life. On those front steps, I'm pretty sure I am not right, that this is not, where are we going here? This is not Arthur after all. And I think I wrote to you about this.
Do you want me to point out?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, yes, yes. Come
Just
up.
for quick, you guys.
Yeah.
I'm Uncle Arthur's niece. Last year, Gwen called me up, my sister, and she said, "Sid, we're going to China." And I said, "We are?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "How fast do we have to get ready?" And she said, "Faster than either one of us has ever had to get ready for a trip." And she said, "On top of that, we got to get a whole bunch of shots, and we got to get visas." So we got a chance to visit the school. This photograph is on the wall there. And so we were both looking at it. And I was thinking, okay, now I have to pick out the blonde kids, because Uncle Arthur was really, really blonde when he was little. And so once I had done that, I put my finger right on this
I thought so
child
too.
here.
Yeah.
And Gwen was off to my right, and she was slightly behind me. She had already picked him out, and so she just nodded.
Okay, so perhaps I was wrong. I always thought she meant this person, but
So-
this
so-
looks like Arthur to me too.
That's what we
Yeah.
thought.
So
Yeah.
I'll put the pointer right there,
Yep.
folks. There he is. He's wearing a nice bright ruby. I wondered about that boy, but I think this is Arthur, I think.
Yes.
Because he was a small man, so the chances are he was small at age 9 there, right? So ignore what I wrote. It's the other boy. But that's pretty neat. That's the last year they were in Chengdu. So the Chinese influence, let's just talk about that a bit more. The way they reached the city of Chengdu, 2,400 miles up the Yangtze River, was, at least in the upper river, was like this.
Yeah, oh God. This is 1914 before the war.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was during the war in 1916 when they reached them. This picture might have been taken before or after that, but that's the kind of human-powered boat they would take on the upper Yangtze. No roads, no railroads, of course, no airports at that point. Footpaths only, and very much one village 20 miles from another would have very different dialects and so on. This is the kind of landscape he often talked about. This is on the Yangtze as well. This is from your trip, actually, last year.
Oh, okay.
Another participant sent this picture.
It's almost like Guilin and Cartwright.
Exactly.
Almost like,
You
oh,
know, you've been to Guilin or not?
Yes, that was on the tour as well.
Mm.
Yeah, because I think they call them karst.
Yes.
The mountains that just
mm,
come up, yeah.
exactly.
But that's gorgeous color.
Oh, and Arthur talked about this so often. I'd be working at his home, and he would just start to reminisce. And oh my, I just loved it. So the way that the mountains would rise straight up from the river and from the terraced fields, excuse me, such as this. That was also from the same fellow, Brian somebody on the trip. So that was just taken last year, but this is the sort of thing he would have remembered. This is what I made, right, for the show. The first piece I made for Mentor and Metalsmith is Lotus and Landscape. There's a lotus blossom in the base. There's this landscape that Arthur often spoke of with the vertical rise to the landscape. Those are moss agates and stones with sterling silver waterfalls between them. But when that sphere is closed, it's like Arthur's world. That's the whole piece with the lotus blossom in the base. They would trek 4 days and 4 nights to a cooler part of the Himalayan foothills to get away from the heat in Chengdu, because it was very hot. But what he remembered about Chengdu was the fact that the lotus blossoms would bloom in the August heat, and then when they come back in September to teach and so on, and go back to school, there were just lotus blossoms all through the gardens, the water gardens. So he remembered that, and it's also a symbol of tranquility, symbol of peace in China. It meant a lot to him. It's a jade, sorry about this, it's a jade lotus leaf, which is like a water lily leaf, pure silver, petals left frosty white inside and polished on the outside, a yellow, maybe I've got a better photograph, a yellow citrine stone with yellow gold stamens. So that represents the August or September heat in Chengdu, and the mountainscape above represents the cooler landscape. To me, this inkwell that Arthur made in 1967 captures still some of the feeling of the lotus blossoms petals overlapping, especially when the lid is taken out. It's an inkwell that comes apart in 2 parts. But that looks like to me a lotus blossom with its petals overlapping and closing up on itself. That's in the exhibition as well. So the first theme you'll see when you see the show is the Chinese influence. There's the real thing. They're big flowers. That was taken in Chengdu, and this was too. These are the lotus gardens. That was in May. But oh my, can you imagine that in August or September with those big flowers? I would love to be there. This is another piece, just parenthetically. Gardens and nature is one of the themes. This is a landscape or gardenscape within a stem vase that I've got in the exhibition that I made in 2013 with gemstones and green gold, very much the same color as the gems, and a textured pure silver landscape, as well as pure silver and green gold up the back. Essentially one piece of metal, wrapped one direction for the base, wrapped the other direction for the stem, and then filled in with texture. That's my style, almost yin-yang, almost Mobius strip-like in terms of the basic form. Back to China momentarily. I know they climbed to the top of Mount Omai at least once, the Brecken family. And there are a number of elephant statues, I gather, in the area. And Arthur must have seen these, because this is what he made. This is a very poor photograph of the end of a mahogany chest that he created, a large cedar-lined chest. This is one of the handles where the elephant is holding onto the handle. This is a better photograph of the front panel. Bas-relief carving in Honduras mahogany that he did when he was in school, probably 1939, 1940.
When did he leave China?
1924, yeah.
He was there between like 14 and 24.
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah, he was almost 10 years old when he came back.
Oh.
Yeah. I think he was 10 years old when he got back to Canada. Many pieces of his work at school at Mount Allison were directly inspired by the Chinese influence. The dragons, for example, the symbols, that's prosperity, that's honesty. And this symbol is the symbol for the word root, R-O-O-T. And that, I just found out today actually, the word in Chinese sounds like gen, almost like K-E-N, gen. And that's close to Brecken. And he took great pride in the fact that his name could be at least represented in a Chinese symbol. And he included it in many of his early pieces. Copper trays, that's on an angle. The bottom of the symbol is over here. A whole series of these actually, in grade A to size. Again, not the greatest picture, but they're all with the same symbol in the center. And it got me to thinking, how can I incorporate this in Mentor and Metalsmith? It means a lot to Arthur. It's something I wanted to incorporate in a way that would be universal as well. So I thought to myself, okay, if I were to fashion a weathered tree stump and have in cross-section, especially at the top where you could see it, the symbol really clearly, the root symbol would be there. That tree stump could be rooted literally to a rock. Well, once I had the idea, I couldn't stop. So here we go. This is the piece. So that's the root symbol. A Chinese friend of mine painted it with a brush exactly like that, and I bought the sterling silver that thick in order to get the exact dimensions and constructed that. That's all solid construction again. And around the base is moss, if you will, in yellow gold and synthetic emeralds. They're actually man-made emeralds. And in the base is a little mouse's house in this moss, which Arthur Brecken would have delighted in. You know, he'd love to find that kind of thing where a fox or a mouse or something could find its little house. He wanted to be that lucky creature with its, carpeted doorstep. I could just mention the stone is a limestone fossil, a type of coral that's now extinct. But I found that as a child in southern Ontario when I was growing up. I grew up on about a 30-acre piece of land, and along the fence rows there's lots of limestone.
So
Mhm.
Chinese characters again?
The ones on the previous, on the,
Well, on this.
oh, there actually is, it looks like two characters, but it is, the whole thing is the word root.
Okay.
Yeah. You're right, it looks like two separate things, but.
Well, no, I mean, I know that Chinese things are made up sometimes of two so-called, yeah.
Yeah, that's for the word root. So that's the root stem vase you'll see in the Chinese influence, and that's its little mouse's house. This is Arthur wearing one of the Chinese gowns that his parents brought back from Chengdu. And I keep forgetting I have my little pointer. Let's see, where's this little crab? There's a little crab on his sleeve here, which you'll see how beautiful this piece is. There's the same crab right there, right? What a color. I mean, that salmon-y, rosy salmon color, pink salmon color. I don't remember how many, whether maybe 10, 12, 14
Yeah, quite a few.
gowns,
Wow.
yes.
And where are they now?
I think they're in the family. Yeah, I think they're in the family.
I'm actually not sure.
I think Gwen has them.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay,
Yeah, she made a point of that.
good,
Yeah.
good.
Oh, yeah, it's just,
Museums would love to have.
oh, I know. He was very careful with them, but he loved to show them to people. He didn't want them to
Yeah.
be hidden away in a vault somewhere.
Well, yeah, it's so disintegrates at the time.
That's right, yeah. I remember my wife trying them on, he even had, oh, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
So it was just really an honor to see that kind of thing. But that's the Chinese influence in what his parents brought back. This is the inside of his house with the Chinese red on the steps and the ceiling. What you can't see is also gold trim all around the ceiling with gold trim, a little gold stalactite finials, almost always a white floor. Classic colors for Chinese garden or Oriental garden that he established over 40 years in his backyard with a high place that you're going up these steps way around to a high place that's about 20 feet above a lower grassy area that he established entirely with 2 buckets and 1 shovel. 40 years, plus 40 years, right? Cumulative process, right? It's like rising the Himalayas. I mean, it's like he took his life. It took his life to make this garden. It was always changing. Well, at least his life when he was living in Ontario.
20 feet, though, was a slopey land, or did he build it alongside his house? I mean, 20 feet is quite significant.
Oh, yes. And he managed to build it up in a way that sort of supported itself. I think he had some, everything in there. He had his old TV in there even. He believed everything should go back to the earth. He's a unique individual.
Wow.
But no, it was not near the house. It was it was almost a vertical drop from the high place, which was a wooden platform with earth under it, straight down to the grassy area, about 7 meters. And he would do a lot of his craft work up on that high place. This is a letter. That's his handwriting. To me, somehow it's reminiscent of China or Chinese characters, but he's writing this on the high place in the warm sun. I don't know if you can see at the back. It says, daylight time is an inspiration with the wildflowers in bloom, and life takes on an outdoor dimension. This is on April 21st, 1980, and I have been doing some work in metal and stone on the red table in the warm sun. Very atmospheric this morning. Fog after all night rain. And this is when I was at Cranbrook Academy of Art. He said, I'm glad that you are where you are to enjoy the flowers of the spring varieties. That's a typical letter from Arthur.
So you were in Cranbrook as in BC?
No, this is actually just north of Detroit. There's a small academy of art, almost a private academy of art north of Detroit. 13 different departments, many craft mediums, as well as 2 and 3-dimensional design, architecture, painting, sculpting.
Wow.
1 instructor per department.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a metalsmithing department there, and they only offer a master's level in metalsmithing.
And are they still there?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So the Chinese influence in so many things, right? The commissions he gave. This is a piece that I made on commission from Arthur, which he wanted me to make a miniature chest of drawers in the shape of a pagoda. And I'm glad to have this picture here, because what you can't see in the exhibit so well, because the lighting isn't quite right, is that the handles have an emerald in the top layer. They have sapphires in the handles on the middle layer, and on the bottom layer are rubies. Can't quite see that in the show. Do I have a detail shot? Just a second now. Let me see. It's about 5.5 inches, like that there, maybe 5.5 inches. No, I don't have another photograph, but when you look at the piece in the show, oh shoot, I'm sorry, fiddlesticks. I'm not a good button pusher. The place where the prongs are held, you can't see it in this picture very well, is actually much lower than the corners of the stone. There's a corner, much higher along the edge than where the prong is. It flips up at the corners, goes down to the prong, flips up at the corner. So it's a pagoda cut on the stone itself. The ebony in the base, the black wood, is wood that Arthur bought for me when we went shopping for exotic woods, as well as the wood you'll see in the handles of the teapot and tea service. He was a very generous man. We went shopping for woods. I was ready to pay for it, and he says, "You're not paying for this, you realize." It was just a facilitator, right? A patron and a facilitator, as well as a friend and a teacher. But I consciously made it in his style, the twisted wire patterning, etc., because it meant so much to him, the Chinese connection. So that's my work in his style. So even 30 years ago, I was thinking of paying tribute to him. This is Arthur at tea time, sitting on the elephant chest. That's the piece that had the elephant carving in the front and the end. Tea time would be a Chinese ritual for sure. And he himself never did make a tea service, but he made a miniature set. So the tallest piece there is 1 3/8 inches high. These three in the back are sort of Art Deco inspired, I would say, and that there. And these are more Scandinavian inspired, I would say. But he'd love to get those out and show people, right? He would fill them with water, because they all work. The spouts are hollow. The spout here is hollow. And he would pour a few drips in each cup. His nieces enjoyed that. He didn't have family of his own, but his students and his nieces, maybe even his nephews, enjoyed that, right? So I, for this exhibition, wanted to make a full-scale set as a companion piece or companion set. So this is the sugar bowl, fairly good size. That big, that you'll see it in the show. And it's very much in my style of clean, smooth, flowing lines, pure forms. The spoon, for example, is about as reduced and simplified as possible. A propeller twist, basically. It's a wonderful challenge to reduce and simplify as much as possible. But also in terms of form and function, I just love trying to dovetail the functional requirements or the human overtones of a piece, so the requirement of a spout on a creamer merges with the rim, which holds the lid. And you can hardly tell where one begins, one ends, which gains thickness and merges with the handle. Again, just there's overlap. Then that merges around and becomes part of the base. One flowing line. The teapot was the last piece that I finished for the exhibition. So it's not in the catalog finished, but this is a picture of it finished.
This photo is gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you. It just works. The overall proportions work. I would love to share with you. How am I doing? Oh, I better hurry. This is the process of just the teapot. I won't go into a lot of detail, but this is the smithing process. It's so different than the water pitcher we saw. Basically achieving a mechanical advantage with a steel stake supporting the metal. That's the sheet of metal on the edge, and a hammer blow just above that. So the metal has to bend down. Basically, one blow side by side with a row of blows, and side by side with rows and rows of hammer blows, working one's way out to the edge. The shape of the hammer blow itself is slightly oval, so there's a directional flow of the metal working out toward the softer material at the edge. The work-hardened metal in the center doesn't flow as much.
Are you hammering it?
Yeah. Let me just get back a second. That's the hammer itself. I haven't drawn my hand on it, but that's the hammer blow hitting just above the point of contact. And so what's happening is one is creating a slightly shallow bowl at the same time as pinching steel against steel. It's very comparable to what a potter would do on a potter's wheel in terms of constricting the circumference in and pinching the clay as they're bringing the walls of a vessel up. Exactly the same, except much slower. Resistant, but very much a plastic solid, a malleable material. It's gutsy. So that's just 2 rows on the right-hand side toward the soft outside. more and more rows. I won't read it all because I'm running out of time, but that's one full course. So this is kind of an upside down version drawing of the way it would look like a bowl. And one just has to heat that to soften it again. You can work it cold, and up we go. I'll just do it in fast time. These would be about 3 courses per photograph. The more the circumference constricts in upon itself, the more courses. I'd say between that photograph and the next, we go 5 different courses, 6 or 7 courses. It takes a long time to constrict the circumference in upon itself like this. So it'd be about 2.5 weeks' work to get there, like that. That's the way that was created by hand, as opposed to electroforming or digital printing or spinning on a spinning lathe. That's the way it was done back in the Paul Revere days, right? Yeah. Just very quickly, the way the spout was done, you were mentioning about the shape of the spout, was done from flat sheet. And this is actually the block of mahogany that I make the handles out of. I will make the handles out of. But I've screwed that sterling sheet down and just exceeded the limit of elasticity in the metal by hammering it down into the recessed shape that I've carved. Cut them in half, or cut them out rather, so there's 2 halves, and solder them together to make the spout.
How do you get a uniform thickness if you're hammering down? You would think it would get thinner.
It does, yeah, it does, especially where the metal breaks from the flat sheet and starts to stretch. Yes, it does get thinner there. Pardon me?
I mean, is that a concern that it would get thinner?
If one was making an extremely deep stretching, yes, it would get too thin. I'd have to start with thicker metal. Yeah, it's a very good point. But on this, there was a fair bit of edge thickness left. Just a matter of matching it up was the trick. So you couldn't tell there was a join there, right? There's actually a vessel in the exhibition. I didn't put it in there, but it's the brass water pitcher. If you see it, it's actually retained. It's retained some of this flat flange to create a base. I bent it up as a base, and to create a handle that I pierced and cut out. So some of the flat flange from another die-formed piece like that is in the exhibit as well. So just very quickly, adding on, this is precise soldered construction now, adding on the rim, and this is constructed as a hollow box area for the wood handle to fit into. Same here. That's showing how the base is being constructed as a hollow area for the handle. And there they're both soldered in place. And the lid is smithed. This piece I just finished up in February. It's the last piece I finished for the show. So I do apologize for getting a wee bit behind here. Maybe I can just maybe I could just talk a little bit about the faith, because the Chinese influence was so important for my teacher, but also the fact that all his life he was very much a Christian, and his father was a professor of theology at Mount Allison. His grandfather was, and missionaries as well. That's his grandfather, in 1891, who was a professor of theology. That's his father, 1902. And this is a piece that I made. Arthur, as far as I know, did not make any ecclesiastic pieces, but this is one that I made when I was in school. And just to very quickly tell you what happened here, I'll go through it fast if I can. He gave me the silver for that. It was rough chunks from an auction sale. We didn't even know if it was silver, but it was. We were able to reclaim it at school, poured it in ingot. The ingot rolled out strong. It worked. Once I had the metal to work with, I mean, the price of silver had gone to $50 an ounce at this point in history, and I couldn't afford it. I made the chalice in about 3 weeks flat. A year later, I entered it in a competition. It happened to win the competition, and the judges that judged that year were looking for a designer, a silver designer at their company in Massachusetts, and they interviewed me, and I was hired. So Arthur Brecken Silver got me there. Without even knowing it was going to go that way. He was such a facilitator. This is bringing the crucible of pure silver out, pouring it in an ingot. There's the ingot. Rolling it out on the rolling mill. I don't know who that guy is. Just lost something anyway. There's the circle I cut from that metal I rolled out. And a little different process, just working on the inside surface, heating it to soften it between courses. Basically multiple dimpling in this case. It's called sinking. Almost like multiple craters. Higher and higher. Slight mechanical advantage achieved as you're going along. And there's the bowl. There's always a quarter in the picture. Again, poured an ingot to get more material to work with. It was from the trimmings, rolled it out, smithed it around, soldered a seam down the back of it with a high temperature solder, almost melting point of the sterling silver. Very strong solder joint that withstood all this hammering to constrict in here and to flare out there. Quite a bit. It's amazing how plastic that solid is. Again, taking all the scrap bits and pouring another ingot from which I made the base. Oops. Hello. There's the metal for the base. There's the base. Then I created spacers and a decorative nut, and I soldered on a post underneath, a brass post with a threaded tip, so that the whole piece could be taken apart and put together. That's the decorative nut underneath. And the spacers, do I have one more? Yeah, you can see the flared stem is actually hovering, which makes the piece as far as I'm concerned. If I was to join this surface to that surface without the space, it would not be nearly as interesting. It looks uplifting, almost spiritual. I love that kind of pure form. Yeah, it's a challenge to reduce and simplify. Yeah, we're almost finished now. Just parenthetically, once we knew this worked, Arthur Brecken sent me about 3 shoeboxes full of his silver scrap, and I reclaimed a whole bunch for him. And he said, if you can do it, Wes, you keep a third of it to work with and give me the other 2/3 back. And so a lot of the metal in this exhibition is Arthur's. The inside of this shows some flaws. I forgot it was flawed. So I was disappointed at first, and I thought, oh no, that's Arthur smiling at me. That's his metal. All the rims around the creamer and the sugar were from his metal. His generosity was such that, in his will, along came rough materials as well as this Chinese ring. Along came this composite of sterling and copper that I carved into my style, but it was metal that he had soldered together. Along came some of his gemstones, including a set of onyx, quartz, and diamond that he wanted to give to a very special lady in his life that never worked out, so he still had the stones all his life. I made that ring. I want to keep that ring myself. Commissions, pieces that he bought from me, came back to me as well. He's generous, even during his lifetime, and some in his will. And the fact that there was a sculptural piece amongst the items that we found from his inheritance, from your sister's inheritance, that inspired me to make 3 sculptural pieces for this exhibition, the cattails. I had almost come that close to a sculptural piece before, but it still has the function of a bowl. This is one of them. This is the last slide. That's my favorite piece of the show. It's called Lotus. It's called Labrador Wave because the stone in the base is labradorite. And when you're at the gallery this evening, you won't see that color so as well, because what I was going by was the fact that the skylight makes it look fantastic during the daytime, but we don't have the lights on it quite as nice in the evening. So you'll see a bit of blue in it, but there's a wave-like iridescence to that I tried to echo in the framework as well as in the leaves. That's the finished piece. Thank you.